Hey everyone, welcome back to the 5 p.m. podcast. I'm Dan, your resident political enthusiast.
And I'm Tina, always excited to dive into these topics with you, Dan. And folks, if you are new to our channel, a big welcome. We cover the latest and greatest, always aiming to break things down in a way that's easy to grasp.
That's right, Tina. And since this is episode 18, you know we've got something special cooked up for you all today. So I was just reading this report on the Senate's new push for cybersecurity reforms.
Oh, I saw something about that. It's the one where they're trying to set new standards, right? To strengthen cybersecurity across the board?
Exactly. They're aiming to bolster national cybersecurity standards. I mean, after all those high-profile cyber attacks we've seen, it's about time, you know?
Seriously. It feels like we hear about a new data breach every other week. So what's the main focus here? Are they just patching up old systems, or is there more to it?
Well, it's a bit of both, but there's definitely some new stuff. For instance, they're introducing this legislation that focuses heavily on federal contractors. They want to make sure anyone working with the government on sensitive data is up to snuff, security-wise.
Okay, that makes sense. You can't have a weak link in the chain, especially when it comes to national security. But how are they planning to enforce these new standards?
So, they've got this National Defense Authorization Act for 2025, the NDAA. It's this massive bill that basically sets the budget for defense and security programs.
Wait, the NDAA? That's the one that authorizes, almost $900 billion in funding, right?
That's the one. $895.2 billion to be precise. And a good chunk of that is earmarked for cybersecurity. I mean, we're talking about measures to enhance cyber defense capabilities, protect against spyware, improve cloud security.
Wow, that's a hefty sum. It's interesting they're focusing on cloud security. I guess that's where everything's heading, right? Everything's in the cloud these days.
Right? And here's the thing about cloud security. It's not just about securing a single server in some government building anymore. We're talking about multi-cloud environments, which is way more complex.
Multi-cloud? What's that, like using different cloud services at the same time?
Exactly. You might have some data on AWS, some on Azure, maybe some on Google Cloud. It's like having your eggs in different baskets, but you need to make sure all those baskets are super secure.
That sounds like a headache to manage. So is the DoD coming up with a plan for this?
They are. The NDAA actually mandates the development of a strategy specifically for managing and securing these multi-cloud environments. They're talking about things like user identity, endpoint security. Making sure every device connecting to these systems is secure.
It's like they're building a fortress, but the fortress is spread out across different locations. I can see why they need a solid strategy for that.
Oh man, this is where it gets really cool. They're also pushing for something called a zero trust strategy, especially for Internet of Things devices and smart technology in military operations.
Zero trust? Is that as ominous as it sounds? Like, trust no one, not even your own devices?
Kind of. Basically, it means that instead of assuming everything inside a network is safe, you verify every single access request, no matter where it comes from. It's like having a super strict security guard who checks everyone's ID, even if they're already inside the building.
That sounds intense. But I guess in a military context, you can't be too careful. So every device, every user, constantly being checked?
Yep. Every time a device tries to connect, it has to prove it's legit. It's a big shift from traditional security models where once you're in, you're in.
I can see how that would be a game. A significant improvement, especially with all these smart devices around. But wouldn't that slow things down?
It could, but the idea is that the security benefits outweigh the potential slowdown. Plus, with the right systems in place, it can be pretty seamless. Like two-factor authentication, it adds an extra step, but it also adds a lot of security.
True. So besides the military, who else is affected by these new cybersecurity measures?
Well, there's this new bipartisan bill, the Federal Contractor Cybersecurity Vulnerability Reduction Act of 2024. It's all about making sure federal contractors are following cybersecurity guidelines set by NIST.
NIST? They're the ones who set standards for all sorts of tech stuff, right?
Right, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This bill would require contractors to have vulnerability disclosure policies, basically a way for security researchers to report vulnerabilities they find so they can be fixed.
So, like a bug bounty program, but for government contractors?
Exactly. It's about creating a more transparent and collaborative approach to cybersecurity. And Senator Mark Warner, he's a big proponent of this. He said it would help reduce known security vulnerabilities among federal contractors.
That's interesting. So it's not just about preventing attacks, but also about being more open to finding and fixing weaknesses?
Right. And it's not just government folks talking about this. Amit Elazari, CEO of Open Policy, he pointed out that this NDAA looks at everything that's unfolded over the last year in cyber. It's a comprehensive approach.
That's encouraging. It seems like they're learning from past mistakes, like those big attacks we've seen.
Oh, you mean like SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline?
Yes, those were huge wake-up calls, weren't they? I mean, the SolarWinds attack showed how vulnerable the software supply chain can be.
And Colonial Pipeline, that showed the real-world impact of ransomware attacks, shutting down a major fuel pipeline. Ooh, that's a big deal.
So do these new laws directly address the issues highlighted by those attacks?
They do. The focus on securing federal contractors and improving vulnerability disclosure, that's partly a response to SolarWinds. And the emphasis on critical infrastructure protection, that's definitely influenced by Colonial Pipeline.
It's like they're playing catch-up, but at least they're moving in the right direction. What about the international angle? Is there anything about working with other countries on cybersecurity?
There is, actually. The NDAA includes up to $300 million for Taiwan's cyber defense and secure communications.
Taiwan? Why the specific focus there?
Well, it's part of a broader strategy in the Asia-Pacific region. There are concerns about potential cyber threats there, and this is seen as a way to strengthen defenses and show support for allies.
So it's not just about technology, it's also about geopolitics?
Exactly. Cybersecurity is intertwined with foreign policy these days. It's a complex picture.
It sounds like it. But I'm also thinking about the impact on regular folks. How do these big government initiatives affect everyday people?
Well, stronger cybersecurity at the national level means better protection of sensitive data, which includes personal information of citizens. Think about government services, healthcare records, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. But there's also the privacy concern, right? With all this monitoring and data collection, how do we make sure people's privacy is protected?
That's a valid concern. There's always a balance between security and privacy. These new measures will need strong oversight and clear guidelines to ensure that data is handled responsibly and that people's rights are respected.
And what about smaller businesses? Will they be able to keep up with these new requirements?
That's a challenge. Small federal contractors, in particular, might find it tough to implement these changes. There's some talk about providing resources and support, but it's definitely something to watch. We don't want to create a situation where only the big players can afford to be secure.
Right. It's like, we need strong cybersecurity, but we also need to make sure it's accessible and fair for everyone. So, looking ahead, what are the big trends in cybersecurity that we should be paying attention to?
Well, AI is playing a bigger role, both in terms of defense and potential threats. There's also this continued shift towards zero-trust architectures, and of course, we'll see more international cooperation on cybersecurity issues.
It sounds like the cybersecurity landscape is going to keep evolving rapidly. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out in the coming years.
Definitely. And as these policies are implemented, it'll be crucial to assess their effectiveness and make adjustments as needed. It's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix.
Well said, Dan. This has been a really insightful discussion. It's clear that cybersecurity is more important than ever, and these new measures are a significant step forward.
I agree, Tina. And it's something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on. Thanks for breaking this down with me today.
Anytime, Dan. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to the 5 p.m. podcast. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of politics and tech.
Catch you next time, everyone.